I'm thrilled to introduce Darren Arthur. Darren Arthur is one of our very senior oncology social workers at Mount Sinai, and he is joining us today to speak about the evolving impact of cancer on one's sense of self and those around them. Darren, we are thrilled to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for having me come and present. It's always an honor to be able to do this. There are a lot of directions I thought that this discussion could go in terms of different topics. And as I thought about some of the more, sort of salient ones, I landed on how cancer can change how we see ourselves and how we move through the world. And when we're talking about sense of self, it typically refers to your perception and awareness of who you are, including your identity, your values, your beliefs, your emotions. It's about knowing yourself and what you stand for, and which can influence, of course, your interactions in the world and your overall well-being. And having, a well-developed sense of self is hugely beneficial in helping us make choices in life, ones that are healthy and important to us. So I thought I'd present some common issues that come up for patients and loved ones, and explore ways to address and think differently about them, and then open up the floor for us to have a discussion about it. I think it could be really helpful also to discuss and sort of explore how you've communicated any of these issues that you've faced with the loved ones in your life. And, we can certainly all benefit from your insight, so I encourage you all to participate. And as we go through the presentation, then think about how some of these topics may have impacted your sense of self, perhaps even positively changed you, allowing you to see others, allowing you and others to see yourself in a different light. So just a couple of goals here. And I should say, does everyone see the slides? And okay, and also you may have received the slides from Jillian, so you can follow along if you'd like.
They were emailed yesterday and today, so hopefully people have them.
Yeah. So we're just going to explore some of the initial influences on how we feel and think about ourselves after a cancer diagnosis, and then discuss various role transitions that may have occurred during and after your diagnosis. And then looking at ways to consider how to better communicate and share who you are with those in your life. And again, I want it to be interactive. I think it'll be best if each slide, I go through the topics that are on the slide, and then, we'll open it up for discussion about those topics. And I always say, please don't overthink your questions. If you have a question, just ask. There are no stupid questions. We're all here to learn from each other. Okay, any questions so far? All right. So some initial influences on how we feel and think about ourselves after a cancer diagnosis. The first part here is looking at the cultural, the spiritual, religious, and the language influences. And a lot of times this isn't always considered, or it happens with all of us, but we're not always aware of them. And so when you're thinking about a cultural response to your diagnosis, could be ethnically on the country that maybe you were from originally, your family's sort of immediate culture. But how do these influence and often, dictate our responses to being sick, to having a particular kind of diagnosis, the kind of treatments that we're considering or have had, and then how we live in post-treatment. And, the cultural understanding, often, like I sort of alluded to before, it can come from another country. If you have a strong tie to another country, what is it like to have cancer there? What is treatment like there? What is the healthcare system like there? And all this together, how has the understanding, the experience of cancer been passed down, discussed in your families? So this is a really important thing, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. The spiritual religious influences, if you have them, how have your beliefs had an impact on your sense of self? We know that spiritual and religious traditions can provide sort of a cultural framework for understanding the human experience, if you will, and also meaning around our experiences. But these can also, cause us, or be a source of, rather, distress, especially if you feel like you've been punished by God, or abandoned by God, and or the influence on how medical decisions and treatments are made based on your or your family's beliefs. And there are often conflicting belief systems within couples, within families. and even between the patient and their medical team. So the question comes up, how have your beliefs helped or hindered you as a source of support and comfort? Aiding in resilience and coping mechanisms, adaptation to your illness. They're all important to look at. And part of that, culturally, spiritual, religiously, is the language piece. There's a lot of new language to learn when you have a diagnosis. Um, Medical language, system vocabulary, health system vocabulary, the kinds of treatments you might be getting, how you process your thoughts and feelings, thinking versus feeling language. And I often will ask my patients, even if their English is really good, but I know that it's their second language, I'll offer them the opportunity to, have a conversation with me in their primary language because most people, tend to be able to better emote and talk about their feelings in their primary language. So the next topic would be, did I bring this on myself? And, there's very few patients, excuse me, if any I've ever had that didn't ask themselves this question. And it really comes down to people looking at their lifestyle behaviors, questioning those behaviors, smoking, drinking, diet, drugs, the amount of stress in their lives, their sexual activity. All of this can lead to feelings of guilt and shame um, that may or may not be evident to you, but certainly can have an effect on your sense of self. And so the question we'll talk about later is, has anyone experienced these feelings? And have you ever questioned it? About, did you bring this on yourself? A lot of people do. And what have been the consequences of that for you? Um, and the next one is facing one's mortality for the first time in life review. I would guess that when you probably first heard the word cancer, it changed you and thought made you think of your mortality, and it changed how you and others sort of see yourself. And it most likely made you think of your mortality, which impacts all of your relationships, your spouse, your partner, your children, your family members, friends, colleagues. It impacts who we are in the world, and even our perspective on what quality of life now means to us, how we want to live more meaningfully. And it may require sort of a redefinition of what you feel your quality of life should be or you want it to be. And that would entail looking at the physical, the psychological, social, economic, and religious spiritual influences and their impact on how you now want to live. Um, and so when facing one's mortality, it can often lead to a life review, and some of you may have done this. And that life review often entails a search for meaning and purpose, and even existential questioning, which we'll talk about on the next slide. So what are we looking at when we're talking about meaning making and purpose? Um, the process of assessing meaning and purpose and value around one's cancer experience is really essential in relation to, again, your partner, your children, your family, your work, your community, and even, if you will, humankind. The meaning that we attribute to having cancer often dictates how you will live the rest of your life. So it's really important to take a look at it, how you think and feel about yourself and how you present yourself to others. So it's important part of that process is to include sharing your story or telling your story about your illness, about the diagnosis, about the treatments. Really any aspect helps in this construction of meaning. And sometimes you may find, or maybe you've already found out, that those people that are closest to us often don't want to hear the story. They're just like happy it's over or want to just move forward and not talk about it anymore. But it's really important to find someone who does. That could be a group, that could be an individual. And remember, of course, and this is a little biased, but your friendly social worker is always available to talk about these kinds of things. Well, let's move on. As I mentioned, some of this when you're thinking about meaning making and purpose, it can lead to some existential questioning. And so I put together some common, existential questions that come up a lot. And I just want to be sure too, as we talk about, existential questioning, what does existential actually mean? And typically it's defined as of or relating to, dealing with, or affirming one's existence through an individual's life experience. And so this questioning impacts how we see ourselves and how we move through our lives with others around us. And so again, these are some of the more common ones. I broke them out into life and purpose, and then identity and self. And some of these may have come up for you guys, and you may have even asked yourselves these questions more than once or at different times throughout the trajectory of your illness. Um, and you know, some of these questions can lead or cause, to like what they call existential distress or suffering. And that can lead then into an existential crisis. And when that can happen, we end up asking ourselves even more personal questions, deeper questions. And often it's the first time that we've even considered the questions. So many times that has happened with my patients. It's the first time they're actually thinking about these questions, and asking themselves and maybe even asking others. And it's sort of that part of life review where they're looking back and reflecting on their life. And some of those questions are, did I choose the right spouse? Why did I have children? Was I in the right job? Did I make the most of my friendships? And one of the real big ones is, did I live the life I wanted to or the life that I had to? When we're talking about additional influences. Some are happening right initially when you get your diagnosis, but then there's some that come along later, and have an ongoing impact and greatly influence, of course, how we see ourselves, and how we interact with others. And so some of those are the emotional and the psychological ones. Um, and to highlight a few of these, and these are, of course, dependent on the type of cancer you have and the location of your cancer. But looking at disfigurements, there's real importance, with some of them being visible and some not being visible, and how that plays itself out in terms of how you see yourself, how others might see you. The level of intrusiveness that some of this can have, particularly when you're looking at like chronic side effects and functional or disabling conditions, that sometimes cause reduced pleasure and satisfaction with some of the small things in life and larger aspects of life. Um, the emotional consequences, I think that's really important to consider because they might be layered on top of already existing mental health concerns. So it might be adding to depression or anger, or anxiety, fear, the ability to experience joy. Um, and the other one I think is really particularly important is taking time to mourn the losses, the physical, the emotional, and the social aspects of our lives that are no longer available to us. And just as we would mourn someone who's died, to mourn these things is really important because there's something that we were used to for perhaps a very long time, and no longer do we have access to it. So I think those are really important to consider as influences. The other one, another one is social stigma and how others view the why. And we sort of talked about looking at ourselves and questioning the why. But, a lot of times there are others or society is blaming you for the way that you live your life. Like we said before, the smoking, drinking, diet, drugs, sexual activities, stress, whatever it might be. Has anyone ever said anything about your life choices, and how they may have caused your cancer? And if so, what sort of impact did it have on you with someone else saying that to you? And lastly, I don't know how many younger adults we might have in the audience, 20s to 40s, but they go through, they have their own sort of influences on them. It certainly can affect their interpersonal relationships because for younger folks, it's often there's like isolation from their healthy peers, don't typically want to be around them. It also causes a dependence-independent situation for young adults. They sort of recommence their dependency on, parents and family members, sometimes even having to move back in with them. It disrupts their careers. It disrupts starting a family, maybe completing their education, their financial stability, and then it certainly affects their body and sexual image and self-esteem. And then for older adults, many of those things sort of transition into older adults as well. But when we're looking at sort of independence, for older adults, it's often a permanent loss of independence, and that can have a profound effect. If any of you have a spouse or partner, there are often conflicts that come up around caregiving, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the role transitions. But caregiving conflicts arise with partners. And also there's worry about living without the other. And then social connections. Some of you talked about that. Being able to get around, ambulation gets in the way. We may not be feeling well, not wanting to be a burden to our friends. It's hard to enjoy activities, and then that often then leads to isolation. And then there's often guilt and shame, and sort of what we talked about in terms of regrets about life. That's part of the life review is looking back, and some of it may not be what we had hoped to be able to see on our looking back. These influences on how we see ourselves and how it, changes us in different ways is very transient. It can be today, and then tomorrow can be a whole different thing. And that's really important because I think we sort of, humans love to sort of grab onto something and not let go. And so we like to know what we know, and but things change, and all of these, can move forward and make us different as we move forward in your journeys and your trajectory. I want to move on to the next slide. When we talk about role transitions, we're talking about loss, at least temporarily, of a patient or caregiver's normal roles. And the change, often involves shifting from independence to dependence, which can be very challenging for couples and families. And this shift really can occur anytime during the course of someone's illness. So when we're looking at couples, and I do a lot of couples counseling around these issues, partners often have to develop a sort of a new skill set, if you will, to perform needed assistance for their partner. And their way of caring for someone might clash or cause conflict between each other. So, examples of that could be, shopping for the first time, doing household chores, paying bills, car repairs, cooking, being the primary caregiver to children, managing and accompanying their partner to appointments, administering medications, providing emotional support, and helping with toileting and other ADLs, activities of daily living. And particularly when it comes to the ADLs, a lot of intimacy issues can arise. The level of intimacy may not be wanted. Or welcomed, rather. And it often involves, different sort of self-images and relational boundaries that often challenge couples. Changing someone's diaper or feeding them or cleaning up drool or vomit, etc. What happens if the partner may not want to or be able to adapt to this needed role? And so it ends up being that there's a sense of loss, for one's former self, that may exist for both partners. And it may be necessary for each of them to sort of, look at various ways of performing the roles, including, which a lot of couples don't like to do, is inviting others to assist, getting outside help if possible. And now, as we're talking about this, a lot of couples struggle with not, they sort of beat themselves up. I can't tell you how many times I've heard couples talk about, I should know how to do this. I've been married to Jillian for 40 years and I love her dearly. Why am I such a bad caregiver? How can I not figure this out? Why don't I know how to do this better? And it really causes couples to struggle. And I often say to them, like, it doesn't matter how long a couple or family has been together. What they're doing now is likely the first time they've ever had to do something. So they're really starting out brand new. So let's start from zero and let's learn this together, right? Because it can be really paralyzing for couples. And some of this bleeds into how families deal with role changes. We think about the different roles that different members have in the family. It can be the leader, it can be the initiator, it can be the planner, the organizer, it could be the breadwinner or the nurturer, the person who is the strength and support person. The family member who is sick may feel a little alienated or a lot alienated without having their traditional role in the family or in the couplehood. And this destabilization can occur even in those families that are really well resourced, have all the resources in the world, and that are well adjusted. It doesn't matter. And the person who is sick can often feel down and depressed due to the lack of this role, which just complicates everything even more. And their mood, being seen as often too negative by the family or the other partner, can affect the rest of the family, causing there to be an even greater feeling of alienation and separation. So shifting roles in families can really cause chaos between the members. And we find that members of families often ask these questions like, who's going to take care of things now that she needs to be taken care of? What about the finances? He always helped me get through a tough situation, supporting me. Who's going to do that now? I've always depended on her. What do I do now? How do we talk to the children about cancer? And as a couple and a family roles change, there's often a loss of social roles. This all plays together. And some of those social roles were actually losses in some ways. Children temporarily or sometimes permanently stop attending school. If you've lost your job or you stopped working, that could lead to loss of contact with your colleagues, and those sort of social relationships. You may be less functional to be social with friends and family, or doing exercise and sports, or eating out, going to the theater. And for some, there's a loss of their role in the community, in their social community. So if you're used to doing church activities, they may have had to stop volunteering, participation in various groups in the community. And when it comes to caregivers, caregivers expressing the need to sort of get out and be social, but feel guilty for wanting to do that, or their partner and family makes them feel guilty for wanting to go out, go shopping, or go see a movie, or hang out with friends, needing time away from the full-time caregiving role. We have just like one more slide but we're sort of talking about the last slide, which is communication. Open and honest communication is essential, obviously, right? And we say that, it sounds like a cliche, of course, but in the context of how, cancer impacts us and changes us, like you guys are talking about, effective communication is key. And being able to have that not only with between patients and caregivers and healthcare providers. It's essential for anyone that's involved in your life through this process. So, these are some of the things that, when I think about, I always use the term, are you talking about the elephants in the room? Because I often have people come in and we're dancing around and no one's seeing the 14 elephants that are standing right next to them. And some of them are very obvious, but people don't want to talk about them, or they don't see them at all. And how do we address them? And so these are some of the things, some of the considerations that I thought would be helpful. But in addition to what we've already said, are there other ways that you guys have found to communicate, um, you know, what your experience has been, like the last question, sharing your experience and talking about how this has changed you in the moment, and how you feel like you're seeing yourself and being seen by others. It's a really important thing to be able to do. So I'm just curious if anyone's been able to, if someone felt challenged by that, or if that has that come somewhat easily.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say thank you to Mount Sinai for all of its support groups because it really
Ah,
provides a safe and nurturing place to talk about these things. And I think toxic positivity can be a problem too.
yeah,
People who are
cheerleaders
like,
are not always good.
get over this, and
Yeah,
this is nothing, and this is going to be fine, and you'll just write a book about it, and life is going to be like you'll live on a balloon for the rest of your life. So it's
yeah.
important to be able to just tell the truth and say, today was a particularly rough day, or I'm going through a hard time, or I'm
Hmm.
going through a great time, but just to be able to have a safe place to do that. And
Yeah.
I'm grateful for the safe places that we have to do it.
Well, thank you. I mean, I talk a lot with folks about, how not helpful it often is to have a lot of cheerleaders in the room, because what it ends up doing is stopping you from being able to, like the first bullet here is being able to communicate your feelings and concerns. If everyone around you is being super positive, and it's hard to then say something that feels negative to them, but important for you because it's your experience being able to talk about it. So, yeah. Any other thoughts around communication or the challenges of that that's come up for you?
I
It
was
doesn't sound like it's been difficult for your mothers, but how about you guys?
I'm just really grateful for the process of elimination. The people that I thought were close got closer,
Mm,
and the people that I wasn't sure of, I became more sure of the boundaries I needed to put in place. Uh,
yeah.
And I learned how important it is to take care of myself and not overgive.
Yeah. And that's a really important piece to find out about oneself. I talk a lot about this with my patients about it's okay to be selfish, not in a negative way, but in a very positive way that helps you get through what you need to get through. And most of us are raised in a culture where being selfish is a bad thing. But yes, it can be bad, but there's a really positive scope to being selfish and knowing what you need in any given moment that can sustain you.
I found Brene Brown.
Uh-huh.
She has some very inspiring thoughts about the necessary, development of boundaries, and how boundaries are not selfish. They're putting your oxygen mask on first.
Yeah, it's very healthy to have boundaries. Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, though, most of us don't consider what our boundaries are. Like in order to be able to communicate them to somebody, we have to dig into ourselves a little bit and sort of figure out, like, what is it that I want? Forget everyone else, but what would be most helpful to me in a healthy way that I can then share with others. Yeah.
I know. I had to become, I had to have cancer to understand that I was putting my mother's needs before my own.
Yeah. Yeah. So your sense of self changed. That's good.
I feel empowered more,
Yeah.
and the thing about cancer is that it's not like TV. Like people all think, cancer, oh my God. But it's like, I have things that I have to adjust for, but you can hug me, you can call me up and tell me your problems. I'm not fragile. I
Yeah.
just have other things that I need to think about in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because the older people are more concerned. Younger people are just like my nieces and nephews don't really understand. They're like, oh, look at your hair. But,
Right.
My aunts and uncles are all like, how you doing?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, so that's then sort of the formal presentation portion, but is there anything that you would like to go back over again or in a different way? Is there anything that, maybe stood out that, perhaps you're considering one of the topics for the first time that you want to look at a little differently or talk about more? Or just any general questions, comments, or feedback?
It
Sure.
was very helpful.
yeah, I almost feel like each slide could be its own.
Yeah, and each bullet on that slide could be its own topic. Yeah. There's a lot of, it's it's something that I think Julie and I thought would be helpful because it's not, when you're getting that initial diagnosis, you're not always thinking about like, okay, what are the influence impacting how I'm feeling? I think, that's not, you're just like, you're on a mission. And I think being able to sort of reflect back and think of, oh yeah, what sort of influenced me in the beginning? What made me think about this or that? Or how did I choose that? Or why did I go to this doctor? Can be really helpful in figuring out, okay, and sort of like she saying, who am I now? How has this changed me right in the moment? And where was I before? Where might I be going? But who am I right now? And I don't think all of us take enough time to do that. And it can be really fulfilling to sort of look inside. And it's not just good for you, but it's good for those around you because what you understand about yourself is so much more easier than shared with others around you. And hopefully that can bring them into the fold, into where you are in life and to be able to better support you. So. Well, thank you, everyone. I wish you all a good rest of your day. And unfortunately, Jillian had to pop off to another meeting, so she wanted to say goodbye. So thank you very much for having me be here today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Be good.